Okay, welcome to Wired for Power. I'm Amra Sandberg, CRO here at Power.
And I'm Dustin Markowski, CEO. Today, we're talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the OBBBA. I think I got enough B's in there. Now officially signed into law this last month.
Oh, yeah, this has stirred up a lot of conversation, a lot of emotion, and I think just fear in the solar world. I think there's a little twist here. While many see it as a threat, we think it actually is great for the industry and great for the country.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to explain why we see this bill not as the end, but as the sharpening of the industry's focus, a cleaning out of bad actors, and a chance to solidify solar's role as a critical piece of our energy infrastructure for decades to come. So let's start with the facts. This bill fast tracks the phase out of clean energy tax incentives. Commercial solar projects must start construction by July 4th of 2026. If they do so, they have 4 years from that date to finish the installation of that project, right? Their other portion of it is that they must be placed in service by the end of 2027. So if you don't meet that July 4th deadline, it doesn't mean that you're fully out of that incentive. It just means that you have to have this thing fully completed in a shorter window of time. On the majority of projects, you're going to be totally fine. But any of those big solar farms that you're working on, it really going to start putting, really kind of uh, cutting down your timelines to try and get it in to meet those deadlines. So,
Follow-up question to that. You say start construction by July 4th, 2026. What is considered the start of construction?
yeah, I think that's a really good question. And many people, ask that all the time. And what the rule that came down is it follows the same trend of a safe harbor, which basically says 5% of the expenses of a project need to be have used or expended by by a certain date in order for it to be start of construction. So typically speaking, when we start a project, we will do something called a site visit. We'll have engineers look at it, at the overall site and all of the information that comes through all the measurements. And then we'll start beginning design and engineering. Usually that phase is typically enough to qualify for a starting of construction. So if you think about it, every time you're looking at a deadline, at least for us as our company, if we have about 30 days heads up, we can usually meet that threshold. But each company will be different. And, it's key to understand what that is when you're going in.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, I think with this bill, it tightens domestic content and sourcing rules. So if too much of your equipment or ownership comes from a foreign entity of concern,
Mhm.
you could actually lose eligibility.
Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
that's exactly right. So that's along with all the other dates that we've been talking about, starting in Jan 1 of 2026, your if you start construction, meaning we hit that 5% marker like we were talking about, if we hit that before December 31st of 2025, there's no requirement. Once we hit Jan 1 and you start construction by that date, 40% of your equipment has to be non-foreign entity of concern, or domestic content sometimes, meaning like it's US. But realistically, there isn't a lot of clear guidance on what that means right this very second. We are waiting for some guidance on it, but everyone is saying right now is we can take the IRS's guidance on what domestic content rules were previously. That was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're saying we can use that as our way to guide us on how we should be looking at it. So you look at it this way: each of your components of your solar system or any type of renewable energy project you're doing should have at least 40% U.S. materials going into that overall piece.
Interesting. And there's more and more companies and equipment being built here in the United States. We know from talking to a lot of these providers of what they're coming up with to have these kind of products ready over the next few years. So those guidelines are going to be easier to meet, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not all restriction, right? Like one of the really great things is the bill provided that bonus depreciation can go back to 100% again. So now, as something that you'd have to take over a term of years, you can get that incentive right up front. So even if down the road you're ineligible for the tax credit for whatever reason, there's still a huge bonus depreciation, and that really is significant.
So, we like a leaner, cleaner incentive structure. It forces quality over quantity. And it also discourages the race to the bottom that we have seen over the last few years from residential and like small commercial operators that just cut corners. So I kind of like this.
Yeah, I'm of the same boat. I think, there sometimes it's been likened to the wild wild west in solar over the years. And this, to your point, it requires us to be leaner. It requires us to be much more efficient. We need to have much faster, infrastructure and the ability to construct and actually make these projects happen. And so, kind of forces the industry to say, you can't do this the way that you've been doing it, right? You can't just shoot from the hip. You have to think, you have to be very intentional about the way you're going through it from the very, very beginning and making sure you're doing it. And that is, I think, is always in the best interest of the customer. And if it's in the best interest of the customer, it will ultimately be in the best interest for our industry.
Absolutely. And through the years, we've seen explosion in the players of solar, especially on the residential side, right? Selling cheaper systems with questionable service. I think the Big Beautiful Bill is really going to kind of thin the herd a little bit, right? And some of the best of who's in the industry is going to be sticking around, and then the ones that are kind of playing that race to the bottom, cutting corners, they'll start to go away.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's not just good for us as a company, right? But it's
Right.
good for our customers, as we were saying. It's good for communities. It's good for America's energy strategy. When you have fewer and stronger players in the market, you get better quality installs, longer lasting systems, and fewer stranded customers. So we love competition. We don't want to see it go away, but the folks that would install something and then walk away. Leaving a system either not fully operational or not being able to be serviced over time, I think we get to see those days be long gone.
Yeah, it's going to be a long-term relationship with your customer. Absolutely. And it's going to be, maintenance and cleaning and and because of all those things that will be in place, you're going to just have a better build in general so that you're not having to come back and do all that maintenance. And that's what it's going to require. And it's going to be amazing customer service, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, the truth is like the biggest problem that we've seen solar address is isn't going green or saving money. It's actually on the deliverability side.
Yeah, I mean,
We should talk about
it,
that.
yeah, when we think about generating electricity, right? The getting the electricity, creating it, or maybe not creating it, but changing its form, isn't the hard part. It's getting it to where it needs to be, right? Like it gets generated somewhere and then it gets delivered to your business or to your home or what have you. It's that in that distribution. Our grid has been aging, it's overloaded, right? And it's really expensive to build long distance transmission. So solar solves that by basically creating a hyper local energy production, right? You create energy on site right where it's being used. So we completely remove that, right?
Yeah, and the appetite for electricity is not slowing down at all. And it's not just because populations are growing. It's actually like the AI data centers, right? EV adoption, all of those things are contributing to this. So the demand for solar is going to continue, right? And we're gonna see that kind of rise just with the need of power in general.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Even with all the changes, right? One of the things that's really interesting too is that there's still a window for businesses to get the best possible situation that we're in, right? I mean, we kind of talked about some of those deadlines and timeframes, early on. And if you think about it, like anyone who's starts construction here before December 31st of 2025, they have 4 years to complete their install. They have that bonus depreciation of 100%. Plus, you get the tax credit already locked in. And then on top of all of that, you don't have to worry about foreign entities of concern content and the makeup of those products. So that actually allows you to have a much more cheaper, more affordable install, but as still at a very high quality.
Yeah, and safe harbor rules are still going to apply for now, but that definition of start that we talked about in the beginning is
Yeah.
going to get stricter. So we really need to make sure, and for the consumer, the person who's purchasing this is, documentation matters, and everyone should keep that as the top of their mind.
And the other thing to think about too is those state level incentives and utility incentives, those things are still alive and well, and those aren't going to go away. They just become a larger portion of what we focus on, right, as we continue to build.
Yeah. Do you think that we're going to see like more of those incentives pop up as, if for whatever reason solar slows down in the terms of sales and Billy's taking this on because of the big beautiful bill kind of maybe pausing some of these projects? Are we going to see utility companies become more aggressive with their incentives? Is there any predictions around that? I don't know.
Yeah, actually, we're seeing it. We saw this start kind of in New England, so in like Massachusetts, in Connecticut. There's a lot in New Hampshire. There's a lot of different places where the utility companies are now saying, there's this time like in summer and at different times throughout the year where peak demand is so high on the grid that it's difficult to service it. And so that's when you see things like brownouts or rolling blackouts or, service interruptions throughout the year.
Yeah.
And so what they're saying now is like, hey, we have all of these customers that have solar systems and have batteries. If you're willing to give us control, we'll actually pay you for dumping your battery into the grid as opposed to using it yourself. And so one of the nice things is these are utility grade incentives. They pay very, very well. We have commercial customers that are looking and actually that are installing like very large storage systems, charge them up right from the grid itself. Right before, because these demands are dates and times are actually pretty well known. They follow a projection model, and so when you basically have it charged and ready to go, you can dump all of that energy into the grid and then get paid really, really well for it. So we're seeing that happen. We're starting to see some of those incentives start to pop up in California as well. So obviously those are the states where energy is the most costly and is the highest. So it's always a place to start. But as that starts, you start to see that crescendo effect across the entire country, right? So over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more of those be
Oh,
adopted.
I've personally seen people starting this as like their side business, storing energy, selling them, having the batteries. I guess it depends on where you're located and where you have access to real estate to do those types of things. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it's a great program, and if you can get into it, why not?
absolutely. I
And
mean,
when
if you want to
yeah,
compare it, it's usually more affordable than building out a solar farm. It
oh
takes
yeah,
up a whole lot less room.
yeah.
And then so the return on it ends up being much, much higher. So yeah, it's been a really effective tool we've seen in the states that are adopting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and at the end of the day, I mean, look at it. The federal credits, that's a huge incentive, right? That's a big number and a big percent you can get back. So if you miss the deadlines, you're not going to get any of that.
Yeah.
So it will kill the ROI on projects. So I mean, getting back to it, yes, I think solar is going to be here forever. I think there is going to be great incentives from utility companies and others. But right now, when we're talking about federal credits, I think time is of the essence. So do what we
Absolutely.
have to get in
And I
our
would
mind.
say even more than anything else, nonprofits, places of
Yep.
worship, probably the biggest places that need to move sooner rather than later because their only incentive is the tax credit, and having it as a direct pay incentive has been huge over the last 2 to 3 years. So that is something that ends up going away. That's really the only incentive they've have in a lot of ways. There's obviously some local and state and utility incentives that they might be able to get, um, but on the federal side, it's really the only one. And so I think to your point, if you've been on the fence, like now is the time to move.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And we're seeing that within our business is, getting phone calls of what do these things mean? How much time do I have? And I'm like, if you're going to do it,
Yeah.
just do it now and then not have to worry about start times and keeping records. It's like, let's just do it now.
Yep.
But yeah, so.
So, I mean, if we think about it, right, what can you do now? So,
Mhm.
like, if we're putting together an action list, I think, we want to accelerate timelines. So this is both on the installer and the provider, but it's also too on the customer, right? So remember, putting a small deposit down, getting your contract signed, doing what you can to meet those 5% thresholds are going to be really key. And trying to make sure that you're meeting that start of construction time frame. Um, vet your supply chain, right? Making sure that you're not going to get tripped up by the FEOC rules. Making sure that you have the right domestic content available in your product is going to be really key. So that's number two. I would say number three is work with experienced EPCs. There's since the tax credit's basically going away in just a couple of months here on the residential side, you're seeing a lot of residential providers starting to go, how do we jump the ship? How do we make sure, stay alive? And they're looking at doing commercial projects. And those, the promises and the timeframes that you work on a residential project is very, very different from the commercial one. So making sure that you're vetting those out and making sure that you're working with somebody that can do good quality work, has the history in the pipeline of commercial projects so that they're not out in 3 or 4 months because of poor planning, I think is really going to be key. And then the last one is there are so many ways to finance a project like this. You don't have to come up with they are capital intensive projects, but like as a good example is we have 70 different lenders in our network that we work with and partner with, right? To try and match up the right customer with the right type of method, if you will, of being able to take advantage of solar. Explore those options, right? There are PPAs, there are leases, but you're not excluded to those too. There's loans, there are tax leases and operational leases. So there's so many different ways to basically take advantage of the incentives that are out there and making sure that you're putting something together. Make sure you explore your options and really find something that fits really well within the parameters that you are wanting to see.
And last thing I just wanted to say on that is, keep in mind, obviously not everything is just about incentives.
Yeah.
Even if all the incentives went away tomorrow, right? The economics of having on-site generation of power are going to get better every single year. So, I mean, at the end of the day,
When we got into this business,
yeah.
the very, very one of the very first things I looked at when I did this is, do I see 25 to 50 years of a solar industry? Because to your point, if it only works when there's incentives, it's not a real industry and it's going to crumble. And that was something that, as we talked about previously, is it solves something much, much bigger than cost, and that's deliverability. And so we do see that longevity, I think, for it. I think that this bill is going to help push the industry towards bigger, stronger, and better capitalized players who can navigate the rules and deliver high quality.
It also reinforces a long-term viability of solar. We're talking multiple decades of growth, not just because of climate goals, but because of like the grid reliability.
Yeah. Yeah. And every year we consume more power. The cheapest, smartest, most secure way to meet that demand is to generate it right where it's used. Right. And that's what solar does best.
Right. So I think we're getting at time here. So the rules have changed, but from where we sit, the future of solar is brighter than ever.
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about a project or just wondering how these changes affect you, let's talk. Visit us at power.solar. We're happy to meet with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Stay powered up.